All right, so I believe we're on. Well, welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be covering mastering four-color process and simulated process using Separation Studio. So we've invited a lot of our customers into the webinar, both from Facebook and from previous purchasers of both Accurate software and Separation Studio software, to continue to learn about the programs and how to most effectively use these programs. So I'll kind of give you a background on my history with printing four-color process, halftone work, and simulated process. I used to print this stuff. I learned how to do it because we started teaching classes. I don't know if anyone's been to a Ryonet Academy before, but we do classes all over the country. And we started this in 2005, just doing it like very small out of like an office building in Vancouver, Washington. And during this class, every afternoon or the second day, we would do a four-color process print. And it would take us all day long to do, not all day long, but a half a day, all afternoon, to do one four-color process print. We ran into all sorts of problems. The screen's not burning right, the ink's not looking right, the image not looking right, registration problems, moire, and things that made it very arduous to actually print the four-color process work. So it was always really cool when it worked out, and whenever we got a design that worked, it was like, bam, we got to keep this one going. But it was always very, very arduous to get there. So over the next couple years, really didn't improve at all in four-color process or simulated process, because we were just trying to do it the way everyone else was doing it. And this type of halftone work, mixing CMYK inks together on a t-shirt and then doing simulated process work on a dark shirt, it can be very intimidating to people, especially if you're just used to doing spot color work. But the thing that was really cool to learn is when we started doing business from Charlie Fassini. Charlie Fassini, by the way, is the developer of Accurate and Separation Studio. And Charlie taught us the best practices for first four-color process. So he started with that. He said, Ryan, I'm going to walk you through a bunch of stuff, because he saw our video, which was, we made a video like in 2005 about how to do four-color process. And it was a joke. It was completely off base, according to his best practices. So because we had been doing it for a couple years now, I was a little skeptical going into it. I said, well, we're doing it the way the industry says to do it, or we're doing it the way we were taught to do it. And Charlie said, well, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I'm doing it the way that I've found has worked best. So these are his best practices. Everything that we're learning in this webinar today is best practices taught to us from Charlie Fassini, who's owner of Freehand Graphics and develops Separation Studio and Accurate software, which I know a lot of you have. So the work that you're able to do from that is just incredible. So here's some of the examples of work that we've done in class, some of the stuff that our customers have done. And once you dial in, that's a four-color process print, a simulated process print, another simulated process print, another simulated process print. So these are both work that customers post on Facebook that we printed in class. Because once you dial in these best practices, oh my goodness, it's so much funner. You have much better results. This is somebody's first simulated process print out of the Separation Studio they posted on Facebook. I mean, look at it. It looks incredible. And once you dial in those results, you have replicable consistency over and over again. And doing a four-color process print really isn't that much harder than doing a spot color print. Doing a simulated process print isn't that much harder than doing a four-color process print. So once you have those best practices in place, then you can really have some fun and you can do a lot cooler stuff. And by the way, do you think this work sets you apart from in a competitive market? Absolutely it does. It gives you the ability to be more profitable on a print because you can charge more for it, and it's work that a lot of people are afraid to do. So by using these best practices, customers who have printed and posted these pictures on our Facebook wall have experienced very, very consistent results and are experiencing all the benefits that we've learned from Charlie. Because now in classes versus 8-9 years ago in classes, we were doing one four-color process print in the afternoon. Right now we knock out both a four-color process print and a simulated process print in under 45 minutes. And it just works every time. It's so awesome to see. And I hope you guys are experiencing some of that luck, and through the course of this webinar and learning the information that we've learned and been fortunate to learn from Charlie, you're able to also experience greater results in the future. So as you have questions through the webinar, feel free to chat in. My chat window is open on my other computer monitor, so I can see your questions and I can answer them according to if you have a question particular to that part, and if I'm going to cover it later in the webinar, I'll simply say, okay, I'm going to cover this later in the webinar. Let's begin. So let's first define the process of the art. So right here we have a couple different options for four-color process and simulated process, but before we go into actually how to print it, let's find out why we want to print one versus the other. So CMYK is four-color process. CMYK is great for light garments. CMYK doesn't work really good for dark garments, and that's why we print those with spot process, also known as simulated process. So on light garments, the reason why CMYK works is it's the same reason your computer printer only prints on white paper. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink is transparent ink. It's supposed to mix together wet on wet to create all sorts of different colors in the rainbow spectrum. So, Chris, you asked a question about index separations. Index is a little bit different than simulated process. Index separation is essentially like simulated process, but instead of using halftones, you're using squares. And the thing about index separations is it takes a lot of colors. So most of the things that you're going to see us doing today in Separation Studio, we can do in 6 colors. An average index print, because you're basically, instead of creating gradients mixing together with halftones, is 14 to 16 colors. So I've honestly never printed an index print because it's so much, you have to create so many more screens. And you can do the same thing if you get good results out of simulated process or spot process work. Now, CMYK, you only need 4 screens. You need a screen for yellow, magenta, cyan, and black. Out of those 4 screens, you get like 160-some thousand different colors. And it's the same way your computer prints at home. You don't have to have 18 different cartridges of ink. You only have to have 4. So the thing is that depending on the type of art, you're obviously corner-tailed into doing either one or the other. For instance, if you have a picture like you see here on a light background, that works great for simulated process if you're going on a black shirt, but because it has a white background, it could also go on a white shirt. And if it's going on a white shirt, we can do that with 4-color process, no problem, all day long. Now a picture like this, however, it's got a black background. Probably not going to go on a light shirt, probably going to need to do that with 4-color process. Same thing with the Marilyn Monroe shirt. You saw that printed earlier. One of our customers used this one, and that's why I pulled it out as an example. Simulated process. Now, this AC/DC one's the one that we used to do in class. This is awesome on a light garment. If it's going on a dark garment, so awesome for 4-color process on a light garment, because the ink's transparent. If it's going on a dark garment, and nothing shows up. So by the way, what would happen if you printed 4-color process with these transparent inks on a black garment? The same thing that would happen if you put a black sheet of paper in your computer printer at home and tried to create a beautiful 4-color, full color image. You would see nothing, absolutely nothing, because the ink's transparent and needs to be on a white background. Well, a lot of people say, okay, well, why can't I just put a white underbase under that? Duh, plastisol white underbase, then 4-color process on top of it. 5 colors, that's all we need. Not as easy as it looks. Plastisol is made out of plastique. Even white, opaque, water-based is very rubbery and very hard. 4-color process ink needs to be printed wet on wet, and it absorbs together in the substrate to actually create its full color image. So it would be likened to printing, trying to put a sheet of vinyl through your computer printer, your inkjet printer. The vinyl would not hold the ink, right? The ink would run all over the place. You'd have a mess on your hands. So that's technically pretty much what happens when you print 4-color process inks over plastisol underbase. So some more examples: black background, black garment, spot process. Full color image, beautiful design. If it's going on a light shirt, we can do 4-color process. If it's going on a black shirt, spot process. So anything that has a light background or could be printed on a light garment, 4-color process is an option. And by the way, it's a great option because you only need 4 screens. The gradients mix together beautifully for most photographic style of image. On dark garments, think of the term of spot process or simulated process. So before we jump into actually doing the separations for 4-color process or simulated process, let's take a look at the art itself. So you guys have all heard the term garbage in, garbage out. Well, we're screen printers. So a good screen makes a good print. good film makes a good screen, and good art makes a good film. So as you see right here, we have two different images. They're actually the same photo, but they look completely different. The image on the left looks like it's taken in January. It actually looks a lot like it does outside my office right now. Very dark and hazy. Well, I live in Vancouver, Washington, so rains all the time. Now, on the right-hand side, it's a bright, sunny day in July at the beach. Same image, the way it's cleaned up and prepped in Photoshop or Photo Paint on the right-hand side made it pop and come to life. Which one's going to print better on a shirt? The one on the right. It's going to print so much better. So this is one of the best practices Charlie taught us how to do, and it's called image preparation. Now you're going to do this for simulated process work or four-color process work. 5 simple steps. We're going to do it right now in Photoshop. These 5 steps now take me, I do it for every image that I'm going to do with four-color process or simulated process in Separation Studio. It takes me a couple minutes, maybe 3. We're going to take a couple minutes doing that here, and especially if you're not really familiar with Photoshop, you're going to say, oh my goodness, I'm never going to remember that. Very simple, because A, we're recording this and we're going to post it on YouTube, and B, it's already on YouTube and on our four-color process and simulated process DVDs, and C, we're going to email out the PDF after the webinar so you can actually have the printed copy of this as well. So I'm working in Photoshop to do this. The reason why we're working in Photoshop to do it is because we're working with photographic style of art. So Photoshop is great for photography. Now if you're a CorelDRAW user, CorelDRAW works great for most stuff, and CorelDRAW has a version of Photoshop called Photo Paint. So it's similar to Photoshop, not quite the same thing. However, you can actually use it. We're just going to be using it to we're just going to be actually using Photoshop because I think it's a little bit better program. And now that Adobe allows us you to do the cloud, $50 a month, you can get access to all the Adobe products. I mean, it's a no-brainer to use Photoshop in my opinion because it's the best program for photographic work. So I do have a question. Is Chip here? Chip from Shirt Warehouse, is he in the webinar? Because if he is, I wanted to use some of his art that he sent in. He's having some issues with. If he's not, we're going to just use the standard stock art. So if you're here, Chip, just chant in. And going once, going twice. Maybe you couldn't make it. So we're going to use some of the stock art that we've been using with in most of our webinars. This is an image that we actually printed with during our last class. So by the way, anyone use Dropbox? If you don't, Dropbox is an awesome way to store your art. We use it all the time for our class art and stuff like that. Automatically syncs and backs everything up. It's an amazing tool. Very, very good for screen printers. So let's find this image here. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this 5-step process. And Angel, we're going to cover it in Photoshop, but like we said, you can also do it in Corel. So first thing, you want to open it up in Photoshop or Corel Photo Paint as an RGB. RGB is very important. RGB is a wider color gamut and gives you more color values than CMYK. So we're opening up an RGB and we're dealing with it in the actual size of the image. So you want to size it. So if you're taking a 20 by 20 inch image, sizing it down to 15 by 15, you want to do that right at the beginning of this process. So to do this process, you want to have either a flat image or you want all your layers merged together. So if you have multiple layers opened, like I'll show you an example of this. If you have multiple layers open, you're going to want to take those layers, merge them together so that, right here, all these layers are separate, right? Well, we're going to want to merge all the raster layers together. So when I talk about raster layers, the Riley Hopkins logo that you see right here, that can be handled in vector. Now we'll talk about handling vector with this type of artwork after we actually do the separations. So you can either choose to separate a vector style of art, which is like a font or a logo. That's vector. That should be handled in vector. It's always the best when you're handling those in vector. Or you can go ahead and do that in a separation program. So rip it through 4-color process, rip it through Separation Studio. The only downside to that is that you can create halftones around the edge of your image. Now, optimal resolution for this is 300 dpi. So you want to go to image and image size. You want to make sure you size it down to 300 dpi. So we're actually going to make this image a bit smaller, but we're going to up the resolution because we're taking the size down. We can go ahead and do that and not lose it. So we have a good quality image. We can zoom in on it. We see that we're good. We have it at the right size, and now we're ready to go through the process. So 300 dpi in RGB format is what you're looking for. The first step of the process, and by the way, most of this process is handled under the Adjustments tab in Photoshop. So the first step we're going to actually go to, and we're going to handle the, it's called, I always forget the first step, selective color. There it is. Selective color allows us to basically play with certain tones in the image. So for instance, if I select green, you notice that this image, I can take all the cyan out of the green and it goes away. It looks like no longer the green lantern, it's now the orange lantern. Well, we're going to actually select the neutrals. And what this is going to do is this is going to constrict the gray matter of the image. And I'm taking each of the neutrals up till about 7. Now you're going to look at me when I'm doing this and you're going to say, well, why is he doing this? Because it doesn't really change that much. So it's anywhere from 1 to 7 depending on what looks good. So I can see this is before, this is after. You can see it takes away some of the haze in that image. So this is before, this is after. And just constricts the image just a little bit. So we're going to handle the neutrals. We're going to boost them up 5-7%. Typically I go 7%, but this image is a little darker, so I'm going to go down at 5%. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to Adjustments, and we're going to adjust the contrast. So we're going to bring the contrast up. We're not touching the brightness. You don't want to do that. Taking that back down to 0. Contrast up anywhere between 10 and 25%. So too much contrast is not good, but a little bit of contrast there. Once again, before, after. Contrast brings out the definition of the image. Then we go to Adjustments again. The next thing we're going to do is saturation. Now you don't want to oversaturate your image. That's oversaturated right there. So I'm going to bring the saturation back down and boost it up just slightly, about 4 or 5%. So once again, before, after, and you're not seeing a lot of changes here yet. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually find the true levels of the image. Now the levels of the image, it's under Adjustments tab, under Levels. If I hold down my Alt key on a PC and Option key on a Mac, the Alt key tells me this is 100% black on that side, and this side, 255, is 100% white. So we see the black in this image. Now, you can definitely see on this low end of the spectrum that there's a lot of black in the image. On the high end of the spectrum, you see not a lot of white. So for instance, even though his eyes look white, they're not showing up in 100% true white. So what we're going to do is we're going to constrict this back a little bit so that the white in the image, which is his eyes, actually shows up. So I pull that back a little bit, and that constricts it just a little bit and allows us to have information in more true form once we go to separation. So the better quality of image this is, the more consistent, unless you're really going to have to mess with this. But if you have a really poor quality image, you're going to notice that you're missing a ton of black on the low end and a ton of white on the high end. Final step, go to Image and then go to Mode. Now for this step, we're actually taking this into Lab Color. And what Lab Color allows us to do is it allows us to simply highlight the lightness channel. So right here we have the lab, full lab, but there's just the lightness. So what the lightness shows us is just the light or lit areas of the image. Now once we're in Lab Color, we can take this and we can go to Filter now and then use our Unsharpen mask. Now what the Unsharpen mask allows us to do, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, is it allows us to actually put a sharper definition on the lightness area. So if you see right here, I can make this very, very defined or less defined. So that's before and that's after. Before, after, before, after. Now you can see when I'm clicking on that, that after the image is unsharpened, it's a little crisper, a little brighter. Now, for this one, every image is handled a little bit differently. I don't see a ton of variance in this one, but it does definitely help. So once we see that unsharpened mask is to where we want it to be, so before, after, just a little bit brighter, a little bit, crisper. There we go. I like that, looks good. Then we take that back into lab color, and then we go from lab back to RGB. So those are the 5 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now let's look at our result. So there's the image now, and then there's the image before. So before, after. Before, after. And you can see when we go before and after, there's before, there's after. The image definitely comes to life. It's brighter, the greens are brighter, the edges are crisper, and as a result, we will have a better screen print. So now that that's done, we can take it in and go through the 4-color process or the simulated process, and it's done either way. So it's very cool because what we just did gives you a better quality image to begin with. So we're going to talk about, instead of doing simulated process first, we're going to talk about 4-color process first. Because 4-color process, as long as you have the ability to print halftones, you can do some awesome 4-color process images. So I'm going to open up an image. Now, by the way, would this be a good 4-color process image? And by the way, if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to chat in once again. This would not be a good 4-color process image, by the way, because it's on a black background. So this is great simulated process, but not great for 4-color process. So let's go ahead and, well, I'm not going to say this. I'll keep this open. Let's minimize it for now. And then let's open up a 4-color process image. So here's a great example of a good 4-color process image, and it's one that we use in almost every class, and it just does it so well because it's a beautiful full-color image. Now, 4-color process works great because 4-color process works great on light garments and works great on photography. It doesn't work good for like spot color, more vector style stuff. So even if that Green Lantern was on a white background, this is more of a vector style of design. 4-color process probably wouldn't be the best option for that. It'd be better to print it in Separation Studio, even if it wasn't a light garment. So Max, we're going to talk about the choke and the spread effect when we get into Separation Studio on dark garments. On light garments, which we're talking about now, not that big. No, not pretty much inconsequential. So to do a 4-color process separation is actually very, very simple. So once again, we're in RGB format, and in order to take it into 4-color process, all we have to do is go to image, then we go to image mode, and we change it from an RGB image to a CMYK color image. So watch what happens when we change it, and then we take it into, you have a yellow channel, magenta, cyan, and black, and there's our 4-color process image. Now, look what happens when I change it, by the way, and this is why we always want to work in RGB color. So there's RGB, there's CMYK. CMYK, you see the image dull out a lot. CMYK is not as wide of a color gamut as RGB. So with CMYK, you can actually get some really cool effects, but you don't have as wide of a color gamut. So that's why we always clean up our image in RGB format. Now, by the way, we went through this process with this image, and it's been already cleaned up and looks phenomenal. You know, very high detail. We look at our image and image size, and we're already at 300 dpi, so we're ready to rock. Now, the problem with just separating it like that is, A, you have to have halftones. So this is halftone compatible. So having AccuRip, having a RIP software is definitely recommended to doing any 4-color process work. Second is you have to ensure that the colors on the computer screen match the colors in the ink or in the screen. Now what I mean by that is color profiling in Photoshop is huge. If your inks aren't color profiled to match the CMYK inks you're screen printing with, you're not going to get a consistent result. So here's an example. What happens when paint or ink or color becomes oversaturated? Well, let's say you're mixing some color together, some paint together on your wall, and you want to create a custom color. Well, if you put too many colors together, what happens to your color? Turns to mud. Doesn't work. Same thing if you're using your inkjet computer printer. You take an inkjet computer printer, you pull up a beautiful picture of your family and you want to print it for your grandma, and you put in best quality photo settings because you want to make sure it prints the best quality photo, and then you put a standard piece of paper in the printer. Well, what best quality photo does is it lays more ink down and allows a inkjet receptive photo paper to hold that more ink, creating a much brighter and vibrant image. However, if you just put a standard sheet of paper through it, it saturates that paper, and what happens to all your color and all your detail in the image? It goes away. So whenever you oversaturate color, you lose detail and you lose your color. And without knowing the color profiles that are needed for both understanding that ink's going to be printed through a 305 mesh screen on a screen printing press onto a textile garment with a specific type of 4-color process ink, the same thing's going to happen when you're doing 4-color process. And this is something that we always fought. So right here, you can see that this is a beautiful image. In fact, it's a very high resolution, beautiful image. In fact, you can even see the blades of grass right here. You can see that somebody they drove through the lawn. That wasn't very nice of them. But you can see the tire marks in the lawn. That's how good of an image we're looking at. However, if we look at the yellow screen, so you can see all the halftones here, but what happened to the yellow screen? What happened to all those halftones? They all turned to mud, because that's 100% black or 100% ink right there. There's no halftones there. So it drastically oversaturated this image, and as a result, we would have a very dark print. So what we need to do is we need to tell Photoshop, listen Photoshop, we need to screen print this image, not make it look good on a computer screen. So we're going to type in 4-color process, color profiles in Google, and that's going to show a couple videos that we made and that are on YouTube, and a couple articles here. Our support desk, which is an awesome tool if you guys don't use it, support.silkscreeningsupplies.com, or if you go to the homepage of our website, you just click on the live help or help library tab right there. And there's over 1,000 articles that help screen printers through the process. And this is one of those articles. Download 4-color process color profiles. So you simply download this file, you unzip it, and then when you're in RGB format, you go back into Photoshop, very similar in CorelDRAW 2 by the way, go to your color settings under the edit menu, and then click on load color profile. That's going to bring up 2 color profiles and then the unzipped file. One is the Ryonet Icy Pro Bright 305 Mesh color profile. And that's our go-to color profile. It's using the International Coatings Pro Bright inks, which are very bright and very vibrant and work awesome for 4-color process, and 305 mesh screens. So watch what happens when we load this color profile. Now if you're using another type of 4-color process ink, it's not color profiled the same way, so you're going to get different results. That's why I recommend using that type of ink, because you get consistent results. And by the way, once we are doing these best practices in class, the image works 100% of the time. I mean 99% of the time. Every once in a while you have a screen that blows out or something. So look what happens when I load the color profile. Okay, that's before. This is before, this is after. And you see instead of the image darkening, the image lightens up. Now, remember how dark that grass was, especially in the yellow channel? Check out what happens when I take it into CMYK color. Well, A, the image didn't change at all, but B, look at the grass. Wait a minute. This is the yellow screen. We see our halftones again. We see our grass again. Now we have an image that is not oversaturated. So this would be the yellow, magenta, cyan, and black. And out of that, we can print 4-color process prints all day long consistently. And it's going to look like it does on the print of the press as it does in the Photoshop program or CorelDRAW. So here's some examples, or here's the example of what we just did. So right here we have the image. Right here we have a print. Now this print was printed with the same screens, the same squeegee pull, and the same ink. The print on the bottom was not color profiled. So it was just going into CorelDRAW or Photoshop and hitting separate into 4-color process, taking a CMYK mode and print films. Done. What happened to it? It got very dark. So compare it to the original image. Not even close. Nice sunny day turned into a stormy 5 o'clock shadow day. Once again, the same screen, the same pool of the ink with just different films that were color profiled gave us a result that was extremely close to the original. So green grass, you see the detail. Oh, by the way, what happened to the detail in the bottom one? Oh, you can barely see the grass. That's how shaded it is. But in the top one, the detail's there. You can see the tracks in the grass still. And you see the bright sun, you see the blue sky, matches very, very closely. And all that is just using that color profile. So, Randy, you asked to show you how to use those color profiles again. Very simple to do. Once they're unzipped, go to Image and go to Color Settings and then go to Load. And then browse to find them. Once they're unzipped, load in the IC ProBright color profile and hit OK. That's how you do it. Very simple. So now that our image is separated, our color with their correct color profile, we can take it to printing films. So here's another best practice that Charlie taught us that drastically increased our success rate of printing 4-color process. And that's the way the halftones are printed. Now in AccuRip, you can actually select the angle of your halftone. So I'm going into AccuRip now. I'm going to File, Setup, and then I have my Epson 1100 printer hooked up. How would you like this to be screened? We have options to select the angle, and we have options to select the LPI. LPI stands for lines per inch. The angle is the angle the halftone's printed in. So right here, you see this halftone, image right here. Make it bigger. Right there. That's about, right here, this magenta is at about a 22.5 degree angle. AccuRip comes defaulted to a 22.5 degree angle. So what we mean by angle is that there's a 180 degrees, 90 degrees. Angle is the way the halftones stack up on top of each other. So right there you see those different angles. Now most people try to create what's called a rosette pattern to print halftones. You see the rosette right here on the screen. And that's printing the 4 screens at different angles to correlate together to these little tiny rosettes. Now, it actually gives a pretty cool effect. And what it's essentially doing is it's giving our eye an optical illusion. So here's a 4-color process print printed in a rosette pattern. And here's a couple swatches from that print zoomed in. So you can see right here the rosettes in this particular print. You can see those tiny little rosette patterns in there. Well, the rosette works, and theoretically, if everything works perfectly, the rosette essentially gives the eye a colored optical illusion to see a full color image in very good detail and vibrance. If you look at it, it's kind of trippy. It's kind of like one of those, if you look at it close, it's kind of like one of those images that you stare at for a while and then you see different shapes in it. Very similar effect that it's doing to your eye. Well, think about this. So I'm going to open up a rosette pattern in Photoshop, and we'll zoom in and we'll kind of pick it apart. So once again, the rosette's printed at 4 different angles. And those halftones all correlate together. So here's a rosette pattern printed in Photoshop. Now what happens if something doesn't quite work out right? What I mean by that is, what happens if this black right here didn't get registered properly? So let's cut that black out of the screen there. So there's a 4-color process, print, halftone, rosette, completely in register. What happens when we get out of registration? Oh my goodness. The whole image turns to mush. And all of a sudden, an image that made sense doesn't make sense if it's just not a registration. Well, not only do you have to worry about registration, but what if your screen mesh is not stretched perfectly? Or your t-shirt weave is not weaved perfectly? Or you get out of registration or your tension's off? Anything like that happens, You lose your rosette and you get what's called moire. Moire is a fuzzy looking pattern in your image where nothing quite makes sense and you see these weird lines going through your image, and that's because the rosette's not working perfectly. So what Charlie taught us to do is, instead of printing with a rosette, we print with a flamenco. Now the flamenco method is essentially stacking the ink on top of each other wet on wet. All the same line of halftones, which is, by the way AccuRip comes defaulted. So if you open up AccuRip, you go to Setup, you don't have to change a dang thing. Just hit Print, change your LPI to 55 line LPI because that works best on 305, and hit OK and print. So we're seeing an emulation of that on the screen right now. Stacking magenta on top of yellow creates red, yellow on top of cyan creates green, and by the way, this is the same way that your inkjet printer prints 4-color process ink. It doesn't make rosette patterns. It prints ink on ink, and it combines the color wet on wet, and it creates beautiful images. That right there, bam, it is money. Do a flamenco method, do the image cleanup, and do the color profiling that we showed you, and you're going to be printing 4-color process images all day long without a sweat. Here's a couple. This is somebody's first 4-color process image they ever printed using this method. Came out freaking really good. And, minus the Disney patent infringement. Actually, I know this was for a Disney family vacation. This is another example of 4-color process print. And they just look consistent time after time if done correctly. So follow those best practices. You're going to get the best results. Now, 305 mesh screens, what we would recommend, 55 line halftone. Before you go to print in the same order every time. We recommend light to dark, yellow, magenta, cyan, and black. Press proof. So don't ever go directly into printing production. Make sure that you have consistent pressure and angle. So either printing on an automatic or you have the same person doing it over and over again. I recommend pushing, not pulling. And then go to print production. So make sure you've run a couple pieces through the job before you go to the production. And then now you're on to the races. So here's an example of a 4-color process print that is actually built on an underbase on a dark garment. This was using a discharge underbase, not a plastisol or an opaque white water-based underbase. Discharge underbase. You can see it worked. It looks pretty cool, in fact. However, that's about as bright as tones as you're going to get out of a discharge underbase, because discharge takes the natural fiber and brings it back. So basically you're seeing a cotton white right here. Not cotton white, but you're seeing a cotton look. And you're not going to get a nice, bright, vibrant look. So this is your best practices. We're going to email this out to you afterwards, and you can refer this back. Now let's go back here and talk about this image, because this image is separated differently because it's not a full color image. Now, simulated process was kind of developed by creating what's called highlight channels. So for instance, let's say we took this image right here and made it a 4-color process print. So we go to mode and we change it into CMYK color. So we have our yellow screen, our magenta screen, our cyan screen, and our black screen. Well, take a look at the reds. They're not really popping. The reason why they're not popping is reds don't really pop out of 4-color process. David, that discharge underbase did have some halftones in it. So, hope I answered your question. Thank you. Now, this red doesn't look great for a 4-color process. I'll show you the original image. So here's this original image. So wow, you can see how much brighter this red is than this red once it's taken to CMYK. RGB color, CMYK color. So what we can do is we can actually create highlight channels. So I can choose my image selection tool, like a magic wand, and select my color range. Now, color range allows me to select certain sections of the image. So if I select the white in the image, you see how it highlights all the white? If I select the red, it highlights all the red. Now, I'm not creating a film negative. I'm creating a film positive. So I take that and I invert that selection. So if I highlight the red, you see it bring the red back into the image. So I can choose all the red or absolutely 100% true red. So I'm going to bring it back so it gets a nice solid red there. Once that's highlighted, I simply select the image and I save the selection as a red channel. And what that did is that created a highlight channel. I deselect it, I double click it, I change it to a spot color because we're printing with a spot color of ink, and change the color to a spot red. So now we have a magenta, a cyan, a yellow, a black, and check out that red. No highlight channel, highlight channel. All the red came out looking awesome. If we need to erase some of that red, like in her lips, we just simply highlight the red channel, take the eraser. So we take our eraser and then we erase just that portion. And we have ourselves a 5-color print, but we got our detail and our colors out of the 4-color process, and we got our bright red out of a highlight channel. Now, doing it that way is how simulated process was actually created, because we could create a white underbase. Select this color range. So our white underbase would be, if we selected the negative of the image, so that essentially would be our white underbase. We'd have to put a black background behind it actually, so we have to add a channel or add a black background. So new layer, black background. So now we can come in here, highlight it, a color range, deselect, and we can actually select certain parts of that image. So we can go, so that's essentially what it'd be. That would be our white underbase right there. So we'd select all the black out of it, and then we'd have it pretty solid, and then we just invert that, and that would be a white underbase. So that would be a very solid white underbase, and once again, one of the reasons why it wouldn't work very well. If we try to create the blending effect of this blue, for instance, well, how much blue do we select? Do we select that much blue? And then once it's separated, we have to save the selection as blue, and then we have to color it, and we have to know what color we're going to color it. So it's a kind of a pain in the ass to put this image back together. And even if you're really good, you're doing a lot of guesswork. So is it that color of blue? Okay, so now, you know, there's the red and there's the blue, but we lost a lot of our halftones. So red, blue, and black. You know, you can see that image starting to come back together, but it doesn't look nearly as good as the original image, the CMYK image. So very, very difficult to do. Now what we've done is that there are programs developed out there, which a lot of you guys have, one of them is Separation Studio, that allows us to do that automatically. So for instance, that Ryonet print earlier, we can save this out of CorelDRAW or Photoshop as a TIFF. So I'm saving this as a TIFF. Now this is fixed and colored. So I'm going to save this as a fixed and colored TIFF. Now if it has a transparent background, you want to save the transparency in. This one doesn't have a transparent background because it's meant to go on a black garment. But this one would have a transparent background, as you can see right here. You'd want to save that transparency in the actual image. So if we go to save, we go save as, and then a TIFF, you want to make sure that we save the transparency there. So I have selected Save Transparency. Now, once that's saved, we simply go to Separation Studio, open that up in Separation Studio, and bang, bang, bang. Immediately, it separates it and does a couple things for us. You know, how many colors do you print with 4-color process? Well, it's pretty easy. You print with 4. Duh, right? 4-color process. Separation Studio, now do you ever need more than 4 colors? Teresa, you can save it as a PNG. Now, Separation Studio, it separates it into 7 colors plus white. Every time. That means any image that we're opening up in here, the max color set that we're going to need to use is 7. Now most of the images we can break down to 6, including the white highlight and the white underbase. So let's try that with this image. And this is my workflow. So I open up the image. Now this image has been colored. This image has been saved as a TIFF or a PNG or a JPEG. TIFF works the best, by the way, because TIFF is the best format. It's going to save the most information. But if you have a JPEG or a PNG, that also works. I don't like JPEGs at all. Definitely the least preferred. Sometimes some funky stuff can happen if I'm opening JPEGs. Then I walk through the image. White underbase. As you notice, the white underbase is nice and soft. The red, there's definitely red. There's blue in there. If I can't see it good enough, I simply right-click it and look at the film, and I can see the film here. So there's definitely, gold. So this is what it would look like if we printed gold directly on the image. Now, there's no purple in this. So immediately I can just delete that channel. There's definitely green, there's definitely turquoise, there's some gray, and there's a white top. So we have an 8-color image. Well, let's get rid of some of those colors. So what Separation Studio allows us to do is it allows us to see what's happening as we're getting rid of the colors with the ViewWrite technology. So Separation Studio, you're going to see when you download and stuff, it's going to have this thing that says ViewWrite. That allows us to see the Pantone colors of the ink that we're actually printing with, because all these inks are the same colors of Pantones that you print with in the Separation Studio kit. So when you get Separation Studio, they come with an ink set. All these inks that you see right here, same colors of ink that we see on the computer screen. Same red, same blue, same turquoise, same gold, etc. So back to the print, the ViewWrite, if we take out gold, we can see what this is going to look like without gold. Now, this image doesn't look good at all without gold. We definitely want to keep that there. But we can see what happens if we take it out. Same thing if we merge a channel. So let's merge the gray channel. We just merged the gray channel. We took it down from a 8-color to a 7-color. And guess what? Nothing changed. We didn't even see it. We can manually merge channels too. So we can apply a channel. So applying a channel is taking the information from one channel, that's the source, and targeting it to the target channel. So where do you want to send the source? Now, because blue and turquoise are light colors, and turquoise has more information in it than the blue does, I'm going to target the blue to the turquoise. So we've done that. We zoom in a little bit more, and now let's delete the blue. The image barely changed at all. Pretty much didn't change. And now we're down to a 6-color print. So, awesome looking print, 6 colors. Now, this particular image, let's say you want to make some enhancements. Let's say you want to bring out the green a little bit more. So we can right-click the green channel, and we can boost the green. So that's what happens if we put more green in it. Well, let's say we don't want to boost it that much, but in this art or this text down here, we want to boost it a lot more. So we can actually just highlight the activate green channel on the top. So that means only the green channel is activated, and we can use our saturation brush to kind of come in and paint over the green down there. So you can see, I'll zoom in down to the bottom here. So back to the saturation brush, I'm going to use the high saturation. Watch what happens. See that green get brighter there? So I'm painting in the green in that image. And making that come out nice and bright. You can do the same thing to anything. So let's say I wanted to highlight the white channel. You can do the same thing to the white. So that's bringing out the white in that image, making it more white. You can do that for the red, the yellow, the green, any of those colors. You want to make some more red in his hair. We can highlight the red channel right here and bring out the red in his hair right there. So that's bringing out that red. Want to bring out the green, in his eyes or around his eyes. That's bringing out the green around the eyes right there. So you can really do a lot of cool stuff by just painting the colors in. Undo that one. You can also get rid of colors. So let's say we wanted to get rid of just the red. Well, I want to get rid of just the red right here. We can highlight the red channel again, and we can come in here, and as we're doing it, we can take the desaturation tool and desaturate the same way we just saturated. So I'm taking that desaturation tool, I'm desaturating the red out of the hair right there. It's very cool what you can do. So it's a great example. Oh, let's take some more green up here in the top. So we go back to the channel, we go to saturate, and now we're bringing a lot of green up here because we want that green to really pop out. So these are ready to go spot colors of ink that you would actually put on your printing press and print with. But you can change these in the artwork program too to see what it's going to do on a different effect. So let's say we want that green to be brighter. We can go to the green and we can see what it would look like with a fluorescent green in it. So that's what the image would look like with fluorescent green. I think it looks a little bit better with fluorescent green, and that's what we actually ended up using is a fluorescent green. Teresa, got a question. Let's check it out. Okay, I'm going to come back to your question after the seminar, okay? Teresa? Thanks for asking it, though. So that's a ready-to-go image. Now, once that's ready to print, we're going to save it out of Separation Studio as a PNG. So it saves as a PNG. Let's do another image before we go into doing how the image is brought in and you print your films. So let's go back to this holiday image here. So this image, let's bust through the workflow again real fast. So this is on a black garment. Now remember, this had a clear transparent background, so it put a black background automatically defaulted. So it's got red, it's got blue, it's got gold, it's got purple, no green, delete that. It's got turquoise, gray, and a white top. Well, let's start merging this. What happens if we merge the gray together? So we merge the gray. What happens? Nothing changed. Let's merge the turquoise and the blue together. Nothing changed. So now we're down to a 6-color image. Now let's even merge the purple. Merge the purple and the red together. Nothing changed. 5-color image. Let's boost some color. Let's make that red pop a little bit. So we can bring out the red. So that red, ooh, but I like the red in that part of the design, but it doesn't look good in the the face of the girl. So I can actually come over here and just highlight the red channel, and then once again, using the saturation brush, boost the threshold on that, and just come in here and paint in the red in the areas that I'm wanting to paint in just the red at. So that's up here. We want that red to really come out. And I have too much open on my PC. PC, come on, buddy. So let's bring that back in. And you can see I'll start again completely fresh. Somebody was asking me the other day, could I like take Separation Studio home and use it on my home computer? And I said, well, you can, but the thing about it is you don't really need to. It's so simple. It's so simple to do. Hey, Rick, glad you guys made it. So, I do have time to do your design. So, let's bust in here. Let's open that up. So this is a design. As long as we're doing it, we may as well do it. So let's see here. So that's the original design you sent over. Here is the finished look. So that's what they wanted at the end of it. So we're going to go ahead and take this into, first thing we have to do is we'll kind of walk through a workflow. And this is a nice project piece. So we're going to save this, make a copy, and save it as a, it's a PNG, I believe, or a JPEG. High resolution. First thing we have to do is we got to open it up in Photoshop. So we're going to find it in Photoshop. We're going to open it up. Now, where did I save that to? Over here. Save as. Saved it to my documents, okay? So once I'm finding that in Photoshop, opening it up. So this is the first step of the process. Let's save it to the desktop. Have too many documents opened up. So come back to Photoshop, go to the desktop, find the image, open that up in Photoshop. Now we're going to go through the image cleanup process. Before we do that, we're going to take out the white background. So we got to highlight the white background. We're going to make a duplicate layer, and we're going to delete the white background. So delete the white background out of the image. Now, I'm probably going to want to feather the edges and do things like that, but in essence of actually doing this for the webinar, we're going to make it as streamlined as possible. So we took out the background. Now we're going to clean up the image. So we go to the 5-step process again. First step is actually we're doing the levels and selective color. So the first step, we actually go through the selective color and we take out the neutrals. So go through the neutrals, bust those up about 7 each. Next step is we bump up the saturation. Go to adjustments. Actually, it's contrast next. So go to adjustments and then contrast. Pull that up, not the brightness, the contrast, about 25%. Next step is we bump up the saturation. Next step, we get rid of the, make sure we have 100% black and 100% white on the levels of the image. So we hold down our Alt key. We see at the bottom end, we do have 100% black right there. At the top end, we don't have 100% white, so we're going to bring this back until we see white actually come into the image. Probably a little bit too much there. There we go. Now we're going to take this into lab color. We're not going to merge. And we're going to deal with just the lightness right there. And then we're going to put a filter, unsharpened mask on it. So that is before, after. See that pop out, before and after. It's too much there. Yeah, it definitely pops out after. Okay. Now we're going to take this back to RGB color. Don't merge. All right, so this is the original. You can see how much brighter that is. Next, we're going to save this as a TIFF. So it's been colored, saved as a TIFF. We're going to keep the transparency in it. Back to the desktop. Save the transparent background. Yes. Once it's a TIFF, going back to Separation Studio, we're going to go ahead and open it up. It's separating it out into 9 colors. Now, you see the background of the image. It's got a little bit of clipping to it, and that's because we didn't really do the best job of clipping it out, once again, because of time. There's our white underbase. I like the white underbase. Looks pretty good. Red, has blue, has gold, has purple, has green, has turquoise, has gray, has a white top. So here's a perfect example. How many colors do you want to break this down to? So you got to ask yourself that. Steve, by the way, for the white underbase, I reduced it down about 10%, 5 to 10%, and it works good, very creamy. And other than that, Ryonet white works awesome. So, Rick, how many colors do you guys need to do this image in? Is it a 6 color? Is it a 5 color? Is it an 8 color? Because that determines how many colors we break it down. The white underbase, typically I like to boost this white underbase just a little bit to allow 100% white to come through in those areas. So you see how my white up here on the right hand side is 100%? That's a good example of a good underbase. You want the white to be white where it needs to be white. So let's say this is a 6 color design. Well, we definitely want to keep the red. There's a lot of information. The blue and the turquoise, because they're light colors, let's see what happens when we merge those two together. So if we merge in the turquoise, you see the image changes quite a bit to blue. Now we come back and we take a look at the original mock-up of the image, how we want the image to look, and it is more turquoise in color there. So let's go back to Step Studio and let's change that blue screen to the turquoise color. So that's it with the turquoise. I like the way it looks. Now you can actually change that in the screen. So now we're down to 7. We can take the purple and the red and combine them together. So we're going to apply and manually merge the purple channel. Image didn't change at all. And let's see what happens when we take out the gray. Now there is quite a bit of gray there. So let's take off the white. We can right click the image and take off the white. And we can take off the gray. So put the white back on. Do we need the gray? Let's see what happens if we take the gray and put the gray into the white top. So we're taking the information in the gray, we're going to the white top, and then we're taking off the gray channel. And I think that looks pretty good. We can actually adjust that white top down a little bit. so that it's not too bright. So now this is a 6-color print. So we got that whole design, a photorealistic print in only 6 colors. From here, we go into Photoshop or Corel. So let's save this again. So save this as, we're going to delete the underbase, delete the gray. We have, now I'm actually going to take out the green. I'm going to put that, I'm going to boost the green up a little bit to make those teeth a little brighter right there. And then also boost the red a little bit. So as I'm making these changes, I'm actually seeing what's happening on the screen. So if I want the image to be warmer like that, I'm actually seeing what's actually happening. This image is coming out looking really good. So now I can save this as an EPS. Once this is saved as an EPS, I can take it back into Photoshop. So there's the original. And I can see this, the EPS back in Photoshop. Where do we see that EPS at? That's that. Save it as EPS. And then come back into Photoshop and open up that EPS. Once we're in Photoshop now, we can see all the layers and we can print our films. So there's our white underbase, there's our red, our turquoise, our gold, our green, and our white top. Now you can see the background layer. You have to actually manually add a black layer in the back. Move it to the top like that. So white underbase, red, gold, blue, and that's the entire image. Now you can see how much different this looks in the Photoshop version versus the Separation Studio version. The Separation Studio version looks photorealistic. You can zoom in, you can see how real that looks. In the Photoshop version, it doesn't even look close to it. It looks horrible, in fact. The reason that is because Photoshop can't read the same color profile as the Sep Studio can. So now you would actually add vector elements to the image. So to add a vector element to the image, because you always want to handle vector and vector, raster and raster, if possible. So we're going to save this and we're going to open this up in CorelDRAW, which is what I have right now for handling vector. I'm going to go ahead and import that encapsulated PostScript because it can open up in CorelDRAW or in Illustrator. So I'm going to go ahead and import that. Now this is a rather large file, so it's going to take a second to import. There we go. So that imported right there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to hit print. And that's going to bring in the spot color of the art. So we go to print and we go to composite. We change that to print composite to print separations. And as it's printing separations, it's actually analyzing the document. So it's bringing in the spot colors shown here and shown here. So doing things in vector actually allows us to maintain a better quality image. So I'll show you an example of this, everyone. If we take this image right here, we can see this image in Separation Studio. This is handled in raster, and this is handled in Corel and vector. Check out the text. The raster is all jaggedy around the edges. The text in CorelDRAW is nice and smooth because it's in vector. If you can handle vector elements in a vector program, you're going to get a better result. If you're handling vector elements in Separation Studio or in Photoshop, you're going to rasterize the edges. Now what that means is that it's not going to be the end of the world, especially if you're in 300 DPI, because if you're in 300 DPI, it's going to look pretty good. But if you really want to do it right, you want to do it in vector. So right now I brought in the white underbase, brought in the red, brought in the turquoise, brought in the gold, brought in the green, and brought in the white top. So it brought in all of our colors and allowed us to actually bring in all those colors to our color Pantone palette in CorelDRAW or a Pantone color palette in Illustrator, because we're working the same in Corel and Illustrator. So right now we're going to take that vector element in the design. So I think you had a crosshairs EPS. We're going to save that down to our desktop, and we can actually apply that back in Corel. So once again, large image, PC, lots of artwork programs open, not liking me so much. It's analyzing the information right now. It should finish up in a second. So handling stuff in vector is the last step of the process. Now, example of something that's not handled in vector. If we open this another image up, so here's an image that we recently printed, and we printed this in raster. So if we go to open, spot process, and as we're wrapping up here, feel free to save up your questions because we'll have a Q&A section at the end. So this Riley Hopkins print, for instance. If we zoom in here, we can take a look at this edge of this image. Now this is a 300 dpi image, so it's pretty solid, but you can see here if we zoom in, the edge of this image right here does have halftones in it essentially. So that's what essentially you're going to be getting, is you're going to have a halftones. So Randy, you want me to go over Illustrator? I'll cover the Illustrator. I don't have Illustrator loaded on this computer, but I'll cover the same thing. So instead of importing an Illustrator, you're placing it, and then you're doing the same exact thing that I just did. So now I'm going to place or import in vector graphics. So I'm going back to my desktop, and I'm importing in those crosshairs. So this is you want to import it as curves because it's a vector. So there are those crosshairs, and I believe the crosshairs went over the image like that. Let's look at our mock-up again, right there. So now the crosshairs are over the image. I can actually see my color palette right over here on the right-hand side. So my white underbase, when I select that as white underbase, I'm actually going to print those crosshairs are going to print on the same exact screen as my white underbase print. So when we can actually right-click the image, we can copy it, and then if we wanted to do a red overprint, we simply select that red as an overprint. So now we select that and we select overprint fill. That means it will print both the white underbase and the overprint. And check this out. We zoom in here, look at that vector. So here's the vector versus the raster edge. The vector is solid, and you can see the raster in the background. It's got these halftones in it. So if you can handle everything in vector, that's going to be your optimal result. So there it is, applying a vector graphic. Now the same thing would go to apply the font at the bottom of the image. Is you would find the font that you want, apply it in vector. Now, if you don't do that, the other option is to design everything in Photoshop. So go back to Photoshop, design everything the way you like it, save it as high of resolution as possible, and then actually separate out the halftones. So for instance, this Ryonet print, if we separate out all the halftones in that, we can take a look at what the edges are going to look like. So let's take a look at the edge of this. As you can see, the edge of this R, this Ryonet print right here, is not good. Separation Studio is a raster program, so it's going to handle raster art, and it's going to halftone the edge of it. If you can keep that art in vector, you're going to be doing much better quality work, very, very precise edges, and that can be handled in either CorelDRAW or Photoshop. So that's pretty much the process going through the whole thing. I did want to show one more thing back in Separation Studio. Is let's say we were going on a white shirt, because we didn't really cover going on different colored garments. So we can actually change the background to custom. So let's say we're going on a gray shirt right here. Well, now we're missing some information, so we're going to want to generate a black channel. I like generating a black channel from the file and choosing the original image. And now you can see the black coming back in the image. So now this is on a gray background, still a good looking print. And you can change this background color to whatever you want. So we can change it to red. So that's like on a red. We could change it to, white, whatever you want there. And then now with the white, probably going to want to adjust that black and make it a little darker so the image pops out a little bit more. That's too dark. We actually can see what we're doing there. So that would be like on a white garment. And you can see how it's all coming together. But that's the workflow of Separation Studio. Now Separation Studio, recommend printing 22.5 degree angle, round dot, the same flamenco method that we talked about with 4-color process, and 45 line halftone through 230 mesh screens we find works the best. So bigger dot, lower mesh to let that more opaque ink through the design. So Separation Studio, really awesome program. If you guys don't have it, you can download a free trial on our website. And we're the largest reseller of Separation Studio, and we do these webinars. We support it, and we have all the inks with it. So if you get it from us, you get it for a little bit better price, and you get all the inks. And if you're using Separation Studio without the inks, we have those available a la carte as well. And the inks make a huge difference. Because imagine what this is going to look like, so back on black, if we just put in, so this is what it will look like if we use standard stock inks. So there's a lemon yellow. There is a scarlet red or maroon or something like that. There is a regular green or regular turquoise. So if you just put blue on the screen instead, it doesn't even come close to looking like the image. You can see the image completely changing color now. So you want to use those actual true colors of ink because it really, really helps out. Let's open it up for some Q&A time. We really appreciate everyone. If is anyone interested in Separation Studio or learning more information about it, we're going to send a follow-up email to this webinar. We will post this webinar on YouTube as well. So feel free to check that information out or ask questions. Take advantage of the whole package as well. So let's go through those questions. Teresa, I'm going to go back up to you, and then I'll work the way down. I'll keep the questions recorded. That way, if anyone else has them. One of my favorite quotes is, successful people ask better questions. As a result, they get better answers. So thank you very much. You guys have been very, very interactive, and we really appreciate that. It makes a webinar and teaching much funner. So I have a lot of files that are saved in Photo Paint as a PSP. So when I save them as a TIFF, it doesn't give me the option to save the transparent background. Okay. Well, what you're going to have to do, if in Photo Paint, if it doesn't give the option to save as a transparent background, find the background of color that you want to use. So if you're going on a white shirt, put that background there. If you're on a black shirt, put that background there. If you can get that, unfortunately, there's no way to get that into Photoshop and save the transparency, so you're just going to have to save the color background that you're going on. And that's the way you can handle that. So, you have a question on Separation Studio. We already covered that because the Separation Studio, Damon, I think is how you pronounce your name, McCoy. You don't have to use the colors, but it works best if you use the colors. However, if you want to use lime green or fluorescent green, you can actually emulate what that's going to look like and see what that does. So that would be this image in lime green. Down. Randy, we covered your question in Illustrator. See, we cover your question. Max, you can use neon pigments, and I would recommend going there and emulating what that would look like. Some of those colors you can emulate, some of those you can't. So here's what it would look like in fluorescent, pink, for instance. So you can emulate it. Brian, if you change the shirt color background to red or blue, can you get rid of the red or blue channels? You can theoretically, but typically I like to keep them in because keep in mind you do have a white underbase there as well. Separation Studio and with separating in CorelDRAW, I can send you an image for that to work. Charlie was supposed to be working on a CorelDRAW workflow for Photo Paint. I honestly don't like using Photo Paint because I've tried it before, and it doesn't work as good as Photoshop. Photoshop is a much more powerful tool. So I have a hard time using Photo Paint even though I have access to it because Photoshop works so much better. Honestly, I never bought Photoshop before, but now that they have the cloud model, it's not that much money to invest in a very powerful software, and you get all the other Adobe products too. So Charlie was supposed to work on I'll actually ask him that and see if he can do a video on how to do that process, that cleanup process in Photo Paint. Randy, I always print 4-color process directly from Photoshop to AccuRip. It's very, very simple to do. Teresa, in Photo Paint, if you can save the transparent background, that would be optimal. But you said you couldn't save the transparent background. I'm not aware if you can or can't. If you can't save the transparent background, you need to save it as the color of the shirt you want to separate on, if that makes sense. Okay, no. Noah, I believe. I'm going to answer your question now. How do I make white underbase a tad bit smaller? Sometimes I print and see fine line of white around the edge of my print. Are you talking about Separation Studio? Or are you talking about another type of process? Can you clarify that, please? Can I use Plastisol for CMYK? Maxfield asked. Absolutely. We have CMYK Plastisol inks, and you definitely want to use CMYK inks. So, you know, Pro Bright CMYK ink. So here are the CMYK inks that we recommend using: yellow, magenta, cyan, and black. Okay, so your answer was not in Separation Studio. You need to choke your underbase. This webinar wasn't really referring to spot color work. It was referring to full color, separation work. You don't really need to choke for 4-color process, but for separation work, white underbase, choke your underbase about a pixel, and that'll give away of that white poking around the edge. Separation Studio does the choking automatically for you. Okay, Chip, you want to go through the color profiles again? Very simple. Go to Google, type in 4-color process, color profiles. Go to the link, right-click the link and download. Once you've downloaded the link, unzip it, go to your Photoshop. Works same thing in Illustrator. Corel's different. There's a video on Corel if you're doing it in Corel. Go to color settings under the edit field, then go to load, find the color profile, and hit load, and we'll automatically load the color profile for you. From there, very simple. Steve, for both processes, so 4-color process, 55-line halftone dot, 55-line LPI, and light garment, 305 mesh. For spot process, 45-line halftone, lower halftone, 230 mesh, lower mesh to let more ink through the screen, and then 45-line halftone, lower mesh. Yeah, I think that was the question. Teresa, if you can save the transparent background as a PNG, use it. Because if it saves it as a transparent background in PNG, it'll work fine. That's what I would recommend. Mesh for simulated process is 230. And once again, I'm going to email everyone out back, and every single question that you guys are asking is covered in the handout that we are going to email out. That basically is, follows my presentation here, and then also in the DVD. So we have a 4-color process DVD that covers all this information in depth, and we have a Separation Studio DVD. So if you really want to learn more about this, you can go to our YouTube channel. You can see some of the videos on YouTube, and you can see the DVD as well. So huge resources. Will 280 mesh work for simulated process? Good question. I've tried it before. Didn't work. Guess why it didn't work? Because it didn't let enough ink through. So I thought it was going to look better because it would give me higher detail. No, not so much. Didn't let enough ink through, and it'll look light, faint, and dull, and the image didn't come out looking as good. Jake, you're asking about Design Lab. Design Lab it's not a raster program. Design Lab is a vector program. So you're going to be handling completely different styles of designs in Design Lab. Awesome questions, everyone. Great questions. Thank you very much. So I'm going to send this back. I'll make sure that we send this email out today to you. We'll probably load the webinar, and then you guys can have access to that. Once again, thank you. Very good information coming your way and coming back our way. We really appreciate it. We thank you for your business and your time. So if you have any questions or you're interested in anything that you saw on the program in this webinar or anything, just email us back from the email that you'll get. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful rest of your day. I'm out. Thank you.